Yes, very warm welcome to everybody who joins in. Hopefully you are sitting in a nice and cool room and not in the heat outside. We have 160 registered listeners, but for the time being, we are around 80. And of course, our seven distinguished panelists, all of them highly recognized experts. I have the pleasure to moderate this webinar. My name is Claudia Wild, and I am the director of the Austrian Institute of Health Technology Assessment and also a partner in the consortium of the CoreMD project. But before we start, we hand over to the panelists. I would like to announce a few housekeeping rules. That is, and many of you will know them already. The webinar is being recorded and will be available thereafter at the CoreMD website. The participants are in the lecture mode, meaning that you are muted, but you're very welcome to interact with us in sending us questions and especially in addressing the specific panelists you want to address, please. And then if you have urgent technical questions, please use the chat function. Otherwise, if you are further interested in the CoreMD project, please subscribe to the newsletter and follow us on social media. And now, before we go to the presentations, I would like to say a few words on the context of the webinar today. The CoreMD project is a 3-year Horizon Europe project that aims to review existing methods for reviewing medical devices and develop further guidances for the European regulators to be implemented in the course of the implementation of the medical device regulation. There are quite a few institutions in the consortium, in the partner consortium. Many of them are either notified bodies or clinical societies or competent authorities or regulators, but also public health institutions like ours. The webinar is not the first one, but the fourth in a series of webinars. The others you also can find at the CoreMD website if you are interested in them. Today, we will talk about training and education needs for the 3 stakeholders groups. And we will start with the presentation of the work we have been doing within the CoreMD, within a work package. And I hand over to Sabine Ettinger. She is a senior researcher at my institute, the Austrian Institute of Health Technology Assessment, and she is mainly being occupied in the project management of the coordination of European assessments on medical devices. And then now I hand over to you, and I stop my own screen, and it's yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Claudia, for the nice introduction. And hello to everyone who is attending today. I hope you can see my screen on full mode.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for the confirmation. So I work together with Claudia at her institute, and I'm happy to present to you today the introduction to the CoreMD activities on education and training, which is also a joint effort by our task group partners, Biomedical Alliance, the European Society of Cardiology, and team of notified bodies. So quickly regarding the content that I'm going to cover today, it's about the activities and the results of our efforts, including also the methods that we've applied, and also to sum up with the recommendations that we came up with based on the results. And those recommendations were consulted and discussed among the whole CoreMD consortium. Regarding the core activities, so what have we done within the CoreMD project? The aim of this effort was to the identification of the training needs in the field of high-risk medical devices for 3 different stakeholder groups, namely notified bodies, regulators, and clinicians. And the main deliverable that we came up with was a roadmap where we collected all of the relevant information. And this was a very technical report, very detailed, containing around 120 pages. That's why we in the end decided also to come up with a separate executive summary of 8 pages that combines and collates all of the relevant information in a succinct form. And what is included in this roadmap? It's an overview of the literature regarding regulatory science and regulatory affairs, about the history and the definitions that already exist. Then we have a landscape of what kind of training is already available, what kind of qualifications. However, this is not intended to be like a complete list, but it should give you an overview of what is available with regard to methodologies and procedures in the field of the MDR. Then we've done, together with notified bodies, the Team NB, exploratory interviews with key stakeholders, including representatives from notified bodies, from competent authorities, and from the European Commission. And this was also to prepare for the survey that we've sent out. It was an online survey that we've developed in the EU survey tool, and included around 25 questions that lasts for around 15 minutes. And there were questions about the training in regulatory affairs, and also about the skills and competencies that were needed. And also we asked about view of the respondents on training formats and modalities. With regard to the survey results, we've structured them according to the main employment groups, meaning clinicians, regulators, and notified bodies. And we also had the option of other employment category, which mainly consisted also of people working in research and engineering, but also industry and legal people were part of the survey. So in total, we've received 409 responses, which we were quite happy about. It was online for 3 months. And the results obviously should be also interpreted with caution, since it was a self-administered and voluntary survey. So there's always could be a selection bias present. So with regard to the core competencies, so we came up with a very extensive table with different kinds of skills along the life cycle of medical devices. And we had in total 6 different domains. And for 3 of these domains, we also had several sub-skills. And the respondents could select 1 of 5 options for all of the domains and the skills. And depending on the answers, they received follow-up questions on the different sub-skills. And so we can already dive into the survey results that we've structured again according to the 3 stakeholder groups and the employment categories. So we've identified some gaps depending on the different kind of groups. So first of all, we have the clinicians. We should specify here that here we mean clinicians with an active role in the evaluation of high-risk medical devices, and those whose daily work is more centered on regulatory affairs. For those kind of clinicians, educational resources are needed with regard to methodologies in the field of clinical trials and post-market surveillance, so that they can participate in clinical investigations, also in conformity assessments. And for that, we could have internships and also on-the-job training, but I will come back to that a bit later with regard to the recommendations that we came up with. Then with regard to regulators, also methodologies is an important topic. Also with regard to clinical investigation of new and emerging hybrid technologies. And for the notified bodies, also what is important is regular training courses on the medical device coordination group guidance documents that are available. And also, again, methodologies is an important topic that needs to be covered. Then also we had an interesting question also with regard to the top 3 skills. So all respondents were able to see the whole list of the different domains, including the skills, and they were able to select a skill as a first, second, or third choice that they would like to have training in over the next 3 to 5 years. And here we have the assessment of benefit risk ratio and thresholds for acceptability was one of a hot topic that was selected by all the stakeholder groups. And then preclinical testing was frequently stated as a first choice by notified bodies and regulators. And for the clinicians, it was study designs and their advantages and disadvantages, what they would like to have training in. And then the recommendations that we've come up with, you might recognize that those 4 recommendations are centered along the 4 presentations that will follow in today's webinar. So I will only cover them very quickly. So first recommendation is a needs-based modular curriculum. This detailed curriculum can be found in our roadmap, and it was inspired also by the STARS consortium, the strengthening training of academia and regulatory science in the pharmaceutical sector. Pharmaceutical field of regulatory sciences, and it should be adapted to training needs of the 3 stakeholder groups, and it consists of a core set of training that can be complemented by different modules. And the second recommendation, training on the job, the internship program for clinical reviewers, that something similar exists from the FDA in the US, and 2 of our colleagues will present their training program also today. And also TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration Australia, also has a similar kind of training. And the third is the EU Network Training Centers for Capacity Building and Harmonization of Curricula, which already exists for drug regulators, and there's also a new initiative that this could be also offered for and extended to national competent authorities in the field of medical devices. And the last but not least, targeted training for clinicians adjusted to the regulatory affairs skills they need in their daily job. Here we mean those clinicians that are not already actively participating in the field of regulatory affairs, but those clinicians that do work in clinical care, but also they should have basic understanding and a basic knowledge in the field of regulatory affairs, for example, so that they can report potential issues with health technologies that they use. And this then should be targeted to them. And to finish, I would like to thank you for your attention, and then also mention 2 further points. So we already have a publication online about the results of our survey, and then also the roadmap, the full roadmap and the executive summary will soon be available also on the Quality website, so you can have a detailed look. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabine, for this first introduction to this topic. And I hand now over to somebody who has developed very thoroughly such a need-based curriculum over the last year, to Tom Melvin. He is well known, and to, I assume, very many of you. He has been a clinical manager at the Irish competent authority that is named Health Product Regulatory Authority, but has moved on towards academia and is now as associate professor for medical device regulatory affairs at the Trinity College in Dublin. And he knows everything about master programs in Europe and his own. The floor is yours, Tom.
Thank you, Claudia. Just to check, you can see the screen okay?
Yes,
Perfect.
we can.
Well, thank you, Claudia and Sabine, and congratulations on the great work in this project. As Claudia has mentioned, I've spent the last 14 months or so developing a Master's in Science and Medical Device Regulatory Affairs. And I think that the work from CoreMD related to this has been really helpful. And I guess what I'd like to do today is maybe to just give a perspective on how the course development worked, and I guess something of a European perspective on the kind of needs-based modules that you need for the medical device regulation. So I guess the course that I'm developing and we're launching in September is a 2-year part-time Master's in Science. It consists of 11 taught modules as well as a research dissertation. It's aimed at people who have some experience of medtech, whether that be in a company or maybe an early stage development or spin out, or there's a variety of different places where people come from with an interest. But I guess it's aimed for people who would also be working. So I guess it's mostly online. There's a couple of in-person sessions and mostly evening lectures. And I guess one of the unique things about the course is that it's housed in the School of Medicine. So I'm not aware of other medical device regulatory affairs courses that are housed in School of Medicine. That often be maybe in School of Engineering or elsewhere. But I also have very close links with the colleagues in the university for some of the activities, and we'll show you that in a second. I guess just very briefly on the Irish context, the course itself is supported by an Irish government initiative called Human Capital Initiative, and medtech is a very big deal for Ireland. It would employ about 1 in 100 people in the country. We're one of the biggest per capita exporters, and we would have about 450 companies, and 50 being the large blue chip type companies, and 400 being mostly Irish started but smaller companies. So I guess maybe just to give you an overview now of the kind of modules and the way that we divide up the kind of topics. We have a first module that's an introductory one. It explains roles and responsibilities to different kinds of economic operators that you have. We have a module then on the person responsible for regulatory compliance. And this is a new function with the MDR in Europe that's somewhat similar to things like the responsible person with pharma. We have a standalone module on digital health technologies. And I guess from the course development, there was a lot of feedback to say that this is a single type of technology which has such unique aspects for its regulation that it probably would deserve its own space. So we've developed a standalone module for that. Then we have, I guess, the clinical focused ones. So we have a module on clinical investigation. And I guess that would probably match some of the needs assessment done in the CoreMD work that showed that figuring out what clinical development plans should look like, or how do you plan a study, clinical evaluation. So I guess this is quite a European thing, but how you combine your clinical data, how you look at data from similar equivalent devices and how you bring it together. We have a module then on biocompatibility, quality systems. And then I guess the module we have here, which is looking at a clinical development plan. This is something that has to be prepared in a standalone document for the medical device regulation. And this is one where working from the Masters in Science and Medical Device Regulatory Affairs, we joined together with students doing a biomedical engineering master's. They're looking at developing new state-of-the-art neural implants, things like, retinal implants for people who are blind. And they will work together with the students in the medical device course to figure out a clinical development plan. So the engineers look at the technology, and the regulatory affairs students then prepare what would a clinical development plan look like. In year 2, it's a lot easier because the dissertation takes up a lot of the time. So we have 30 ECTS credits for year 1, 45 credits for year 1, and just 15 taught credits for year 2 because the dissertation takes 30 credits itself. So in year 2, we cover risk management, the qualification or classification, and then we have a slightly broader module to finish out on regulatory policy, where we'll look at things like reimbursement. We'll also look at advertising or marketing of medical devices, and a number of other slightly broader topics. I guess maybe just to give you a perspective on the course development, and I guess this is just really my experience over the last 14 months. When you're starting a new course, at least in my university, you have to develop quite a detailed course proposal. And as part of that, you have to have a lot of stakeholder engagement and talking to experts. And I guess some of the things I learned from that is that it's really important to understand who your target student is. And I guess that's somewhat similar to the core MD work, where you looked at clinicians, people who work in notified bodies and people who work in authorities. I guess understanding exactly what it is they want from the course. For the course I'm developing, it's for people who will be working in regulatory and quality affairs. But you could see other training needs for people who will be, like you were saying, the clinicians who need to understand clinical study design and good clinical practice and those kind of things. So there's, depending on who the target student is, that will influence the kind of development and the kind of content you need. I guess the second thing that is very clear to me is that you have to understand that with medical devices, you're going to have lots of different disciplines. Because the way the legislation is arranged around medical devices as a technology, it needs a lot of engineers, clinicians, statisticians, toxicologists, people who are purely quality specialists. So I guess you have to be able to develop a course that has sufficient detail so that they can understand a lot of the other activities, but that isn't too general, or that doesn't get into way too much detail that you start to lose people who might be coming from different backgrounds. So I guess that's one of the real keys, I think, to try and developing the course, is understanding how much detail you need and how much people might need, depending on their perspective. And I guess the last part, and I guess this started to come true very clearly to me from some of the work I do, where sometimes I go to the business school and I do workshops, especially for people developing digital health technologies. And it always becomes very clear to me that, especially in the software community and in a couple of other communities, the medical device regulation appears as this really impenetrable, deeply complex, highly legalistic structure. So I guess we have to kind of acknowledge that. We want to develop training materials. In Europe, a lot of the time, when you develop teaching materials, you end up showing the students that there's something written in the law, but also something in an NDCG guidance or a MedDev guidance, and something in an ISO, and understanding that hierarchical nature between the requirements, the guidance, the standards, so that you know exactly how to apply it and prepare it and document it. I think that's one of the really important kind of soft skills that you need when you're both preparing the written and also having meetings and communicating verbally about this. So I guess that's the presentation and the update, and thank you very much for your time.
Tom, we thank you for giving us the insights into what you have been doing the last 14 months and what you will be doing from September onwards. Hopefully you have a peaceful summer in between. And I would have already have quite a few of questions, but I'm not the important person. I ask the participants to write the questions in the chat. And for now, I hand over to Elizabeth McIntyre, who will give us the clinical perspective. Elizabeth is a hematologist. She was the past president of the European Hematology Association, and she is now the president-elect of the Biomedical Alliance in Europe. And she will give us the perspective what the clinicians delivering their knowledge to the expert panels need when it comes to training and education. I hand it over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Claudia. I'm just putting my slides on full screen. I hope, can you see them, my slides?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So as Claudia said, I've just stopped being president within hematology, and I'm delighted to shift my efforts a little bit to the Biomedical Alliance in Europe, who I've worked with since 2019. And I'm Scottish, but I've worked in France for the last 30 years, where I'm a diagnostic hematologist at Necker Hospital and Université Paris-Cité. But I'm here today because I've within the Biomedical Alliance in Europe, which is a wonderful organization created in 2009 that aims to represent a single voice for now 36 medical specialties, so that we can talk clearly and cogently to the European Commission and to the various stakeholders involved in transverse issues. So as I said, we represent 36 European medical societies. You only join as a European society. There's no individual membership. And we represent over 4,000 researchers and healthcare professionals. And the trouble is for the Commission is when they want to reach out on medical issues, there's a bewildering variety of medical specialties, and which sometimes tend to sort of cancel each other out. So 4 specialties were intelligently suggested we work together to have a clear voice. And what we do is we represent the translational value chain from basic research through translational research and increasingly to what I think is nicely termed implementation research. Once we've proven that we can do something, should that innovation be integrated into healthcare, and should it be reimbursed? Now, obviously, health within the European Union is a member state issue, at least for everything that concerns pricing and reimbursement. But as we've all learned with COVID, there is a European dimension to healthcare, and therefore, I at least, and I'm not the only one, am delighted to see a European dimension to health technology assessment, or HTA, kicking into place. And that's a big challenge for our healthcare systems. But it's up to us to make sure that we face up to it appropriately, because the bottom line is, how do we target as much appropriate care to the patients who are mostly likely to benefit from it, with equality of access to both geographical and an intra-member state level. Now, the Biomedical Alliance is divided into varieties of committees, task forces, and working groups. And obviously today we're going to concentrate on the Regulatory Affairs Committee, but we also have a group working on continuing medical education, a research committee, an academic clinical trials task force, which also works on limiting inappropriate bureaucracy in classical clinical trials. And we couldn't do anything without our very competent policy officers. But when I joined the board, I was asked to head the in vitro diagnostics task force, which is part of the Regulatory Affairs Committee, alongside the medical devices task force and more recently, the health data task force, working on the legislation for the European health data space. Now, I'm not going to give you details of in vitro diagnostic aspects, because this is not the time or the place. But what I did want to mention is that, as I've said, we're following in the slipstream of what happened for implantable medical devices. And we realized that this was not something that involved a single specialty. So we formed a task force of 14 interested societies. But the 3 lead societies that have been working very heavily on this is the European Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine, which is mainly, but not exclusively, clinical chemistry, the European Society of Human Genetics, and the European Hematology Association, working closely with one of our scientific specialized working groups, the ESLO Scientific Foundation for Laboratory Hemato-Oncology. And we divided up the work between us because there's a lot of work to do. And we're interested in what happens. Historically, CE marked IVD kits were part of the preceding directives. But with the arrival of the regulations, we also have to find an appropriate way of facing up to the impact on laboratory developed tests, which in Europe we tend to call in-house devices, partly in an attempt to distinguish when we're talking about FDA, North American regulations versus the increasingly clarified European legislation. We were asked to be stakeholders in the Medical Device Coordination Group, the EFLM and the Biomedical Alliance. And by working closely with the multiple stakeholders, we developed an increasingly consolidated, respected, and with mutual confidence space in the multi-stakeholder landscape. And you can see here, this is taken from a publication from on our view of what was going on in vitro diagnostics. And this paper was actually signed by the very competent head of the IVD section at the Commission, which and it put into writing that we as the Biomedical Alliance and other academic stakeholders, and we as the health institutions have a bi-directional relationship with the manufacturers in a technology transfer process that leads to declaration of conformity for CE IVD mark kits, but for a declarative process for in-house IVDs. So as my last two slides, how can healthcare professionals contribute to regulatory affairs? We can report adverse events, and we would much, much prefer to spend our time on reporting the relevant adverse events rather than being inundated with reporting of somewhat less relevant adverse events. Because in trying to cover everything, you end up losing the important aspects for perhaps the slightly less important. Academic specialists participate in clinical trials, and we're having to learn how to adapt that to the new environment with increasing real-world evidence alongside our randomized clinical trials. As I said earlier, we're learning what our place should be in health technology assessment, and that's an active area at the moment. We participate in stakeholder panels such as the ExpertMed panels, the European reference laboratories, and we really do hope that the appropriate experts that can maintain expertise and pragmatism are present in these panels. And we do need to address the issues of how we manage conflicts of interest so that the people who know what they're talking about are allowed to be in these panels. We work as clinical experts with notified bodies, and we have a huge role in developing new in-house devices or medical devices, some of which will move on to the manufacturing sector, and some for which, for various reasons, will stay in the academic sector. And we use knowledge of the regulatory system in our everyday work. But as we move towards a European health space, there is a real need for teaching tomorrow's specialists and today's specialists how this works at the European level. So I'm now coming back to what you've already heard. What form, as a healthcare professional, what form should regulatory training take? And we need to remember that there are schematically two categories. There are people who have chosen to very much specialize in the regulatory sphere, but then there are people who have chosen to stay a specialist in gastroenterology, psychiatry, cardiology, hematology, whatever, but need to understand the evolving European and national landscape. Training must be flexible because people have day jobs. That means short training modules. We can discuss whether it should be just the healthcare professionals or whether it should be mixed disciplinary training. There should be appropriate sessions at medical congresses. I think what place there should be in undergraduate training merits discussion, but it should probably not be zero. It should not, of course, be at the expense of learning the therapeutic or the diagnostic business that makes us choose to become doctors. There should be short training courses, preceptorships. These should complement webinars and e-learning. And obviously, everything that we provide should hopefully be clear enough for people to understand a system that must not become so complex that it's inaccessible to the people who are practicing medicine in today's precision medical world. And on that note, I would thank you for your attention, and I will stop sharing my screen.
We thank you, Elizabeth, for your insights on the medical perspective on what is needed, and also for giving us a glimpse on the future on IVD, because IVD is a bit lacking behind, or the IVD assessment is a little bit lacking behind the assessment of the medical devices. And now we will turn to our regulatory colleagues, first to those who join us from across the large ocean from the FDA, to Stephanie Schett. She is International Policy Analyst at the FDA, the Center for Devices in Radiological Health, and to Kenneth Kavanagh, who is Chief Medical Officer in the same Center for Devices of Radiological Health. Thank you for already opening the slides, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Please let me know if my sound is okay. Should be okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudia. Okay. Good morning from the Washington, D.C. Region. Good afternoon for most of you. We are here to present training on the job or job shadowing from the FDA CDRH perspective, the Center for Devices. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Stephanie Shedd, policy analyst in the international affairs team at CDRH. And I have before that, I came from about 16 years of experience as a pre-market reviewer in the Office of Orthopedic Devices. Dr. Ken Kavanagh is here with me. He's actually a deputy director in the Office of Cardiovascular Devices and participates in multiple harmonization activities on behalf of the center. So we will start with a quick overview of our didactic or curriculum-based training. And a lot of that actually does parallel with some of the talks that we've heard already. And then we will hopefully spend most of the time talking about the roles and expectations of the on-the-job training that we do within CDRH. So, a quick overview of our organizational structure. Within CDRH, the Office of Communication and Education provides most of the classroom and professional development training that occurs. It's applicable to a variety of audiences across all of CDRH. Our Office of Product Evaluation and Quality, or OPEC, is where the review work occurs, but that office also generates program-specific training and is where the majority of the on-the-job training between the work groups is centered. So another quick review slide. My apologies. A quick overview of our review office responsibilities, if you're not familiar. OPEC is responsible for evaluation of medical devices and IVDs across the product lifecycle. So that includes pre-market, post-market, and compliance and enforcement activities. Reviewers may elect to be a general reviewer and conduct all these types of reviews or to specialize in one of these areas. Important to note that the offices are organized into teams of reviewers based on the device type. So that includes a team of lead reviewers, medical officers, and other technical experts as needed. So wanted to note here that medical officers often participate in many aspects of the product lifecycle and across multiple device types. So they're likely to be trained in more than one of these areas. They're not usually as specialized, but hope to take on all of these responsibilities. Our reviewer training plan includes general and device-specific content. Training comes from multiple resources, including the CDRH level division of employee training and development, which generates some of our curriculum-based content, and then at the OPEC and office specific level down to on-the-job training that occurs among supervisors and peers. Oops, apologies. The bulk of our classroom training occurs at the CDRH Reviewer Certification Program, or RCP. This is a core curriculum for all reviewers, including the medical officers. The classroom training includes the basics of medical device regulations and laws, medical device regulatory pathways and review processes, including the clinical trial review, soft skills, and administrative requirements. So there is also a mock 510K review and a group project. And there has been iterative changes over the years based on feedback from participants and who've identified the gaps between what's provided in the program and what's provided on the job. Of note is the request for more hands-on aspects of the job, which led to the incorporation of the mock 510K review. And another intangible benefit of the program that's often cited is the networking aspect. So these folks are meeting other new reviewers outside of their organizational structure, which in our virtual landscape post-pandemic is challenging, but remarkably, it's still persisting. People still cite that as a benefit to participating in such a program. So why do we need on-the-job training? This point really speaks to some of the themes I've been hearing already today. Our regulatory reviewers come from varied backgrounds and experiences before they came to FDA. So one classroom-based curriculum may not address all of the employees' needs. In addition, different device areas have different risks and technological aspects, so different expertise is needed on the technology side. And there is a difference in the balance of regulatory submission types to account for. So the need was supported for on-the-job training in an independent assessment that was conducted in 2013, similar to the one that Sabine had talked about from CoreMD. So it's interesting to see. That survey concluded that pre-market training is limited. The study determined that after the formal training programs available at the time, 57% of pre-market staff were confident in their understanding of review processes, while after the on-the-job training, that percent rose to 92% confidence. So we intend for on-the-job training to support new reviewers during their first 12 months and beyond, in addition to, and usually at the same time as supporting the formal onboarding and new reviewer curriculum-based training. So on-the-job training is seen as a team effort to ensure that new reviewers have the support they need from multiple levels. The resources are provided that support a new employee's peer preceptor through a shadowing process, their supervisor, their office's assistant director for professional development, and guide them to other available programs within CDRH, some being more informal and some are more curriculum-based. So I will now turn it over to Ken to talk more about the responsibilities and the activities for each of these roles.
All right. Thanks, Stephanie. I apologize in advance if my voice sounds rough. I'm in the middle of a cold, but I'll step through, I guess, these various other types of trainings and what role they play. So maybe one of the more crucial ones is just shadowing. Reviewers following others and being part of the same activities to learn from somebody more experienced. In those cases, each new reviewer would be assigned a preceptor to be somebody who has experience and maybe some common work duties, and they would share their wisdom and their experiences with the new reviewers to help them get up to speed as quickly as possible with the aspects of the job that really require a bit more hands-on type learning. They're not necessarily something that's best taught in a kind of classroom setting. That takes various roles. Involves different levels of expertise. There's some basic learning that can happen as well as just advanced topics that come up. There's the scientific aspects of how to evaluate devices, and there's the administrative aspects of how to write the memo. So it covers kind of all areas. And they're just available as a resource. I think as Stephanie mentioned, this can tail off over time. Maybe they don't need to check in for every file like they would at first once they've been here a year, but they're still available as a resource. There's always going to be some situation that comes up where it helps to talk to somebody about, hey, I've never seen this before. What do I do? One other aspect about shadowing that I would mention is important now is this was, I would say, more natural to do in an in-office type of work environment. You could just stop by somebody's door and ask for help or have lunch and talk through things or whatever. Whereas now that we're in a hybrid or virtual work environment, it's required a little bit more intentionality, I would say, to be able to set up a recurring time to talk or set up a time frame where the new reviewer says, hey, are you going to be available from 11 to 12 on Fridays? I may stop in and talk to you then. So in order to ensure that this learning continues to happen in this way, we've had to be a little bit more careful about how the shadowing works. Next slide, please. That's one level. So the supervisor also provides another level of support. I mean, they're an official manager. They can, of course, provide some technical help or just help with overcoming certain challenges, but they also provide the job of a manager. Providing help with, working with others, ensuring that they're making adequate progress in their development, and providing just some professional development resources. So again, this may require more hands-on type involvement at first, but eventually it'll become a little bit more hands-off. But the supervisor, of course, still has a role with that employee. You also heard a little bit about our professional development staff. Each office of reviewers has an assistant director for professional development. They're not really a manager. They're more like a coach. So somebody who can work with the reviewers to help them be a sounding board for ideas and also just talk through professional development in a general sense. They're not going to be technical experts, but they're going to have discussions like, okay, you're interested in this type of work. Now, maybe these are types of trainings or experiences that could help you develop those skills and further your career and build on the experiences you already have. Next slide, please. I mean, here you can just see, I guess, more just the types of things that we think are important to learn on the job. You know, again, something that's better learned by doing it rather than by hearing about it. I think some of this can change over time and may depend on the reviewer and what they need. But these are all the types of things we like to see addressed in order for somebody to feel like their on-the-job training was successful. Next slide. I can just touch on a few other resources that we try to make available. You can see some of them here. These aren't necessarily part of formal on-the-job training, but they're available. We tried to make sure people have access to learning about various scientific and regulatory topics. We have various programs intended to ensure review consistency as well as best practices across review areas where it makes sense to be consistent, and just keeping on top of our strategic priorities and, regulatory changes, which happens fairly often with us. Next slide. We also have other types of mentorship opportunities, as well as leadership development type programs. And also, we don't want to neglect just kind of the real world type learning aspects. We have a program where reviewers can visit external sites like manufacturers or hospitals or whatever, or get training from them to learn more about the types of experiences they have. I think this is similar to like the internships I was hearing about earlier in the presentation. And I think this type of real world experience, along with just going to scientific meetings and hearing about what's going on there, is definitely a crucial step in terms of reviewers learning how to do their jobs most effectively. Next slide. So in summary, we talked a little bit about kind of the didactic portion of training, and now the last part focused on the on-the-job training and the types of roles that can fulfill. A lot of it does include some reviewer-specific type training versus things that everybody in the center needs to know. And it does take some extra time and some attention to make sure it happens, but it's an effective complement to the classroom-based training. And so far, it seemed to be appreciated. And we try not to just have it focus on getting through the file on your desk, but helping people feel engaged in the job and see this type of work as a career, something they can build on. That's all for our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, you two FDA colleagues. It was highly interesting, and this truly can function as a role model for Europe to set up such a program as well. But we'll, I assume, need some time and some reflection. And finally, I would like to turn to our European regulatory colleagues. I ask Ken to stop the sharing, or Stephanie, yes, and turn to it again will be represented by two officers. Esther Martinez is the lead in the EU Network Training Center, and she is already since 2011 at the EMA. And I think all of us do know that the European Medicine Agency has been given quite a lot of coordinative activities, tasks in the recent years. So she moved on in March of this year to the EU Network Training Center. Before that, she was in good manufacturing practice inspection. And Dimitris Panidis, who will follow her, is also a scientific regulatory affairs senior specialist and is since 2022 coordinator of EMA's MDR and EVADR implementation activities. Before that, he was in the Greek National Competent Authorities and inspector in good clinical practice. And now I hand over to Esther. We see it's not in full screen. Yeah, now it's in full screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for the nice introduction. And hello, everyone, all participants. So what I would like to do in the next 5 minutes is to present what the EU Network Training Center does and how we support capacity building and harmonization of training curriculum. So first of all, what are we responsible for? Well, we operate and manage our learning ecosystem on regulatory and scientific topics for the EU network. And when we talk about the learning ecosystem, what we are referring to is a system of people, content, technology, meaning tools and processes, culture and strategy interacting together to deliver, integrate, and support training across the EU network. And the way we manage that learning ecosystem is via the EUNTC. And the EUNTC is a centralized resource for knowledge sharing, for capacity building for the European Medicines Regulatory Network, which, as many of you know, consists of the national competent authorities in the EU member states, the European Commission, and the European Medicines Agency. But beyond regulatory and scientific topics, more recently, actually since 2022 at EMA, we have launched a new initiative which is called the Digital Academy. What the Digital Academy is really a hub for digital awareness and building digital skills. And here we're talking about the use of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and other digital tools, which can be used in the development of complex healthcare solutions, including the medical device sector. Let's just use the analogy of building a house to talk a bit more about the EUNTC. So if we use that analogy, what we do is we provide the building materials, the foundation, the walls, a high-level architect's plan, and the budget, and we rely on specialists' expertise to furnish and decorate the rooms of our house. If we don't have that commitment, that expertise, that time, of our experts, then the rooms remain bare. So how does that analogy translate into our day-to-day activities? Well, what we do is we provide, facilitate, and coordinate the decentralized creation of content by topic specialists and experts in order to meet the needs of our learners. We also provide the necessary structure, processes, and tools to support the quality and efficacy of the learning design and development. And we manage the learning management system, which we normally refer to as the LMS. And this is our platform where we host our training catalog that we use to make the training courses available to our target audiences, which at the moment are mainly the colleagues from the national competent authorities in the EU and EMA. I would like to tell you a bit more about the strategic objectives and our priority areas. And what you can see on the screen right now are our strategic objectives to 2025, which are divided into 4 pillars. The first one, expanding the EUNTC to new target audiences. The second one, strengthening curriculum development. The third one, strengthening the services and tools that we make available to course developers. And last but not least, strengthening the digital learning ecosystem, meaning the tooling and platform. And as you can see, these strategic objectives are aligned, of course, with our priority areas, which are strengthening our core activities, preparing the EU network for the future, ensuring the sustainability of our system, and increase the collaboration with our stakeholders. Because I mentioned that strengthening curriculum development is one of our strategic objectives, I would like to give you a little bit more details on our approach to curriculum development. So just starting with the definition, a curriculum is a collection of recommended learning courses for a specific knowledge area within the EU regulatory network. So the first step is to assemble a curriculum steering group, which is a team of experts for that subject area. And then the curriculum steering group goes through a 6-step custom-made approach for curriculum development. The 6 steps are the ones that you have on the screen right now. So first of all, selecting and scoping the curriculum area. Second, outlining the business objectives. So what's the purpose of the curriculum? Third, defining and detailing our target audience. Number 4, detailing the learning objectives for the audience. Number 5, outlining the key topics and content areas. And as a result of this step 5, what we would come up with is a curriculum framework document, which will serve as the basis to build the content of the curriculum. So the last step in the process would be to develop and deliver the training on the defined topics. To conclude my presentation, I would like to give you just a flavor of some of the curricula we have under the umbrella of our EUNTC, and take these just as examples because this is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you some of them, we have curricula on ATMPs, so advanced therapy medicinal products, on pharmacovigilance, pediatrics, on big data. I also mentioned the Digital Academy earlier, so digital skills. And last but not least, we are currently developing a curriculum on medical devices. To give you more details on this curriculum, I will hand over now to my colleague, Dimitris Panidis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. Thank you all for having me invited also to this webinar. So indeed, I will try to provide you with an overview actually of what EMA currently and what EMA endeavors to do in the area of medical devices training curriculum, because it's the first attempt, of course, to build such a curriculum in the area of medical devices. But where this need comes from is obvious that this stems from the new EU legislative framework and specifically the MDR and the IVDR, which both introduce new responsibilities for both the EMA and, of course, the national competence authorities regarding the assessment of certain categories of medical devices. Of course, there are implementation challenges of this new EU legislative framework, which is, as also Tom knows very well, not the easiest piece of legislation to be implemented. But from the one hand, we have the need for the harmonized interpretation of the MDR and the IVDR among member states. And on the other hand, of course, we have the increased training needs of the NCA staff so that they can apply the MDR, IVDR provisions in a consistent way. So, of course, these two needs couldn't be also at the same time the first two key objectives that should be covered and addressed by the medical device curriculum that EMA is trying to develop for the EU regulators, and it should be, of course, comprised of training courses that would become part of the EU NTC training platform that my colleague Esther talked to you about a while ago. Of course, achieving these two first objectives means that the next two will be even much easier also be met, so to drive consistency in decision-making related to medical device aspects, and of course also ensure high quality of medical device assessments and reviews for regulatory procedures. Nevertheless, focus on specific scientific and regulatory skills relevant to medical devices and the development of wider and up-to-date expertise in specific or new areas relevant to medical devices, of course, remain key objectives as well for the development of the medical device curriculum. And last but not least, we see also that a medical device curriculum could also serve the purpose of having a forum, during the training courses, for knowledge sharing and special competencies, and also exchange best practices across the EU network, especially when we're discussing about case studies and so on. So just to give you a flavor of what a content, an indicative content of such a medical device training curriculum could have is, of course, from a pharma regulatory perspective first, to talk about drug device combinations, consultation procedures for companion diagnostics, for medical devices incorporating ancillary medicinal substances, or medical devices composed of systemically absorbed substances, software, of course, and digital technologies, borderline products and other, but could come more from the medical device regulators in particular. So clinical investigations, vigilance, and such aspects, of course, could also come to play. Now, During the development of this medical device curriculum, EMA, of course, always puts continuous effort to have the minimum possible overlap, and of course also to avoid work duplication in relation to other similar training initiatives that EMA becomes aware of for NCA regulators, like the EU for Health Joint Action on increasing capacity building of the EU medicine regulatory network. Now, if we would like to have a look at the currently available training courses in the UNTC platform related to medical device IVDs, you would see the picture you see now on your screen. And as you can obviously see, especially after the period where both regulations came into force, so after 2022, I wouldn't say that this table could compare to the content, to the rich content of the curricula that Esther showed you before, the other areas where EMA, of course, EMA was in the past more active in creating content like ATMPs, pharmacovigilance, and so on. And this is why, of course, in the sense that this is a platform, the UDC platform means that everybody, of course, can benefit from the content, but of course, everybody also could contribute to the content of the UNTC platform. So we had recently an idea to run a survey among the national competent authorities in order to, first of all, map the landscape of the currently available training material among the national competent authorities in certain thematic areas of medical devices and IVDs. And secondly, also was, of course, the scope to identify the UNTC needs on future trainings in regard to implementation aspects of the MDR and IVDR. And of course, all these would also serve the goal to enhance the development of medical device training curriculum, which will further support the training needs of the NCA staff in regard to the consistent and harmonized implementation of the MDR, IVDR, which remains one of the scope with paramount importance. So that was all from my side, and I will begin to answer any potential questions that may arise later on. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. And I give thanks to all the speakers because you have been so disciplined with the time given. So we have another 15 minutes and there were 3 questions. Now there are only 2 left. Okay, we start. The first question is addressed to Elizabeth, asking, the question is gone by, but I've read it anyhow. I'm asking about your remark on the adverse events, what you meant with that.
I don't quite know how to translate this into English, but I'll make an attempt. But the enemy of, perfection is the enemy of excellence. In striving to not miss anything, it's the innumerable SUSARs that clinicians get exhausted with filling in, and nobody can see the important events behind these innumerable SUSARs within randomized clinical trials. And in today's documented world, maybe artificial intelligence can sift out the importance from the massive, you never know, I may be better reported. But if that's at the expense of pragmatic, expert observance of patient safety, then we need to be doing something about it.
Thank you. Hopefully the person who asked it is satisfied. I hand over the next question to the European colleagues, and you can choose yourself who wants to answer. It is a long question, but it's actually focusing on the regionalities. In contrast to the US, Europe is highly regionalized, and there are a lot of players and stakeholders in the system. And here they are called middlemen, and a lot of interpretation and different interpretations are out there. So the question is, should the European Union oblige each stakeholder to be somehow certified in order to deliver tasks in the medical device regulatory system? Is any volunteer to answer this question?
Claudia, I could maybe start.
Yeah.
I guess from my perspective and looking at the new regulations we have for medical devices and IVDs, I guess, one of the changes that it brought in terms of, required competence is that new role of person responsible for regulatory compliance. And I guess I went to their first meeting in October of last year, and they have a representative group, and it's interesting to see them learning what the practical application of that new role will be. And I guess in a very simple way, as we go from the directive to the regulation, we've gotten a huge amount more detail now in the legal text about all the aspects that function in the system. And I guess that's a real challenge in a decentralized system, because trying to get more harmonized training materials is a really important thing, because when it's decentralized, people should be, working to the same common principles. But I think it makes the job of setting up the curricula that little bit harder, but it doesn't make it any less valuable, I think. So I guess hopefully we will start to get more harmonized training methods. I think it's really needed for the system. And I think the law itself is, I guess, somewhat more complicated now. And I guess we also need to help translate that to the various disciplines that have to apply it.
Sarah Finocchietti, who asked it, is writing that the national competent authorities do not even agree on Article 74 and Article 82. Maybe you know what those articles are all about. You're smiling. Okay,
I can give a very quick answer on that. There are two types of clinical investigation applications that you can make under the medical device regulation. So Article 74 are post-market clinical follow-up investigations. So you have to give a notification 30 days in advance of a post-market study where there's additionally invasive or burdensome procedures. We have an interpretive problem in Europe because there's two mentions of those post-market studies, but authorities have been somewhat split on whether it's all post-market studies or only those with additionally invasive or burdensome procedures. So I guess it's one where I think the Clinical Investigation and Evaluation Working Group is looking at revising their questions and answers document, and hopefully there'll be some more clarity there. But yeah, it's a slightly technical question.
Okay. Then there is a question to Stephanie and Ken about staff, scarcity of staff, that the FDA struggles to recruit and retain staff. And are there any learnings that you can share with us approaching these challenges of staff issues?
Sorry, I can start that one off, and Steph can join in if I miss anything. I would say, yeah, that is a challenge for us, especially, I would say, for physicians. I think our challenges with retention and hiring are maybe beyond our control. They have to do with things like pay or required limitations and outside activities. I think those can get in the way of people coming to FDA wanting to stay a long time. What I will say, though, within our Center for Devices is all of the professional development activities that we talked about. Those were introduced fairly recently, and that was intended to, I think, keep people engaged in the job, to help them understand the job you come in doing is not the only job you're able to do within the agency. There's other pathways, there's other career trajectories you can take. So that's where I think a lot of the leadership training, a lot of the training we provide in terms of let's say giving a pre-market reviewer some more exposure to post-market activities is intended to help people understand maybe how they can move along their ladder within our center. That all started a few years ago. I'm not aware of any evaluation to see whether our center's retention numbers have changed at all. I can just speak as a manager myself. I have had reviewers who've said to me that the ability to gain leadership skills in a formal way has been a big factor in terms of them wanting to stay. So I think that's nice. And I think a lot of people do take advantage of them. So I would say it helps. I would say there's also a lot of other factors that go into that are beyond our ability to control. Steph, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to
add. No, I mean, from my perspective as a previous pre-market reviewer, I think, things that we highlighted, like the communities of practice, the focal point program, kind of help the those with specialized experience, the medical officers, the toxicologists, folks with very specialized experience, to engage with each other and kind of stay on top of their scientific knowledge. I think, that helps with retention as well, because sometimes, we try to not live in our little black box of FDA, and this kind of helps them expand their professional knowledge as well, while still maintaining their roles at FDA. So time will tell how some of those survey responses improve over the next couple of years.
There are a couple of questions addressed to the UNTC Center. One is are there any courses available for external stakeholders as well? And then are there fees associated with the courses available? And then the question that EMA is developing, is EMA developing a curriculum to train medical device regulators? Yes, I think this is the question is yes. But so the questions are there any training programs for outside stakeholders, not competent authorities and not expert panels?
Perhaps I can start, and Dimitris, please feel free to contribute. So as I mentioned in the presentation, our main target audience at the moment are the colleagues in the national competent authorities and at EMA. But I also mentioned that we have this ambition and objective to open up the UNTC to other future audiences, external audiences. In the meantime, while we are setting that up, what we can refer to is to the training materials that we already have published on our corporate website. So for colleagues who don't belong to an EU competent authority, if they are interested in training in a particular area, they could browse our EMA corporate website and have a look at the trainings that are there, because those would be accessible and publicly available. Dimitris, would you like to add anything else?
Thank you, Esther. Of course, yes, we wouldn't like to give, of course, the, let's say, wrong message, but certainly EMA is coming so intense in the medical devices field and has the absolute knowledge to develop also training courses specifically for medical device regulators. This is not clearly the case. I was expecting actually this question. That's why I put in the presentation the indicative content of such a medical device curriculum, and selected in particular the areas where actually the pharma regulators are more affected by the new MDR IVDR, because there are clear overlaps, and the pharma regulators need also, of course, to talk with their counterparts in many occasions in their same competent authority, because as you know, in Europe we have dual entity authorities, and it's also time for them to start talking to each other, because there are many overlapping provisions in the regulations that actually affect also the pharma regulations. So I gave you just examples of drug device combinations, the consultations on companion diagnostics and ancillary substances and so on. But of course, this is not the only method, because of course there is a lot of room for further training, which of course the network, the UTC training, can also benefit from the medical devices world, because the regulators there, of course, they can provide their own expertise in areas, as Tom mentioned, of clinical investigations, of clinical evaluation, and the path to develop a medical device and all this. So this could also be part of a broader medical device training curriculum. So in this sense, we need to see this overlap, and we need clearly to identify the need for collaboration between the two worlds and the regulators from pharma and medical device as well. And this has to be reflected also in the medical device training curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you. We are nearing the end of our webinar, and therefore I take only one more question, and this is directed to Elizabeth directly. Is there a value for associating of notified bodies with the Medical Alliance? There are many clinicians within notified bodies whose opinion and experience can be valuable.
Absolutely. If we communicate with each other, we will find the right solution. It's a bit like adolescence. If you're no longer talking to each other, then things go badly wrong. So absolutely. And we are working on ways to, I don't think it's just for notified bodies. We also need to communicate with our competent authorities. There's no point in blaming Brussels if you don't like what you get. It would make much more sense to roll up our sleeves and to talk to each other to make sure that we like what we get as we're building the European health space.
I think this was a perfect last word for all of us that sends us into the summer. Thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you very much to the participants and for the vivid discussion at the end now. I wish you all a good summer, and I close the meeting now. Bye-bye.